Hello, it's Paul Clegg here. I'm really excited to be here with Andrew Snell from Quay Financial. Now, finance isn't necessarily my strong subject. That's why Andrew, he's my financial advisor. I've known him for 20 years. He comes with the utmost of authority, and I felt with all the turmoil that we have in the world right now and people's concern about their futures and finance, redundancies and what to do with that sort of money, etc. I thought it would be a really good opportunity to get together with Andrew to find out what really is going on financially. Andrew, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Just before we get into it, I've known you for a long time. Now, I know the answer to this. Who's your favourite football team?
Manchester United.
That's why we get on so well. Now that will turn most of the viewers off now, especially the Liverpool and Chelsea supporters.
They're now saying, how far from Manchester does he live?
And in your youth, were you Rolling Stones or Beatles?
Rolling Stones.
Marmite?
Marmite, yes.
Oh no, the opposite there. And what was your favourite subject at school?
Quite a difficult one, that. I might suggest physics or maths.
Physics or maths?
Yes,
Favourite?
But to be honest, in the gym, playing basketball.
Yeah, was that your favourite sport?
That was my favourite sport, basketball in the gym. No, cricket, rugby, football, played them all. Yeah. Not that good.
Yeah. Basketball
was my sport that I really enjoyed.
And have you always been in financial advice?
No, my career is basically an engineer. I did a degree in engineering many years ago, and pursued a career in using that qualification. Very rapidly, actually, in my career, became a manager of men rather than having a specific engineering function. But it was in the engineering environment. But yes, at the age of 23, I was suddenly put in charge of 125
wow.
assembly shop workers, which was a very interesting time back in those days.
Yeah, we're not going to say what
No.
Those days were. Andrew, we have very volatile times, and you must. I think one of the things you've said to me is that because of lockdown, you're now being able to reach out to people, not just here in the Gillingham, Dorset, Somerset area, but you're able to reach out to a lot of people over the whole of the UK. What sort of questions are people asking you about their finances?
In the early days of lockdown, people were saying, have I lost all my money? Has it all gone? What's going on? What do I do? Do I hide it under the mattress? Those are the sort of questions. They were the absolutely logical questions that people were going to ask you, as to what have you done with my money, sort of thing. Is there fear? Quite a natural fear. So those were the questions coming out. Much more now, it's about what happens if I'm made redundant. How long is this situation going to go on for, and what's going to be at the end of it?
So we've really got two types of people that you're talking to. You've got those people who have already, say, retired, and they've got their investments that you're overseeing. Am I
yes.
right?
Yeah, very much so.
And you've got those people who are coming up to retirement or realising they're going to be made, or there's a chance of being made redundant, and so there's different sets of issues. So let's start with the people that are already retired.
Essentially, what you're talking about there is people who have created their financial security, if you like, throughout their working lives. They're now in a retired situation, and they've been living relatively comfortably and happily, and now they see that their money investments may be at risk, and greater risk than they were prepared to live with. So that's their fear, is that having spent all their lives building up their financial security, that may now be in question going forward. So, I mean, that's a fairly natural, again, question to ask. And my function then is to be able to give them, hopefully reassuring answers. Although my crystal ball isn't necessarily any better than anybody else's crystal ball.
Should they be looking at rebalancing their portfolio? Is that the sort of thing you would do if people are not getting that sort of service from their existing financial advisor? Is it good to have somebody else check over?
Well, that's the good news about the way I've advised people to invest their money, that very much today I'm a great believer that you need to have people at the coalface who are looking at the situation and making decisions on your behalf, because the world moves so quickly with computerization that decisions to be fed back through and discussed with the client is sometimes too late. So I've always adopted, or for very recent years, adopted a process of using a discretionary fund management process. That means you've given permission to the people who are investing your money to change the portfolio according to the situation that they see, and keeping it within what we call a risk profile that you, the client, are happy to live with. In other words, if it starts to get outside of that risk profile, they will automatically rebalance it. So that function with the monies that I've advised people to invest is happening automatically. So the question, should I look at and rebalance, is not a relevant question for the client, because your fund managers, your management process is doing that automatically for you. And they're in a much better place to make the right decisions about how to rebalance than the client is.
Just as an aside, are they doing that because of they'll clearly be doing it with their experience, but I suppose with AI, they've got real-time information coming through.
Lots of real time, lots and lots. It's a bit like weather forecasting, which, believe it or not, we are much more accurate with these days than we ever were before, because we can simulate so many different things that could happen because of historical information. And you've got the same thing going on with discretionary fund management. Yes, we're in a pandemic, which is a once in a 100-year type situation. So you could say it's unique in that sense. But you can simulate these things. You can do millions and millions of simulations in order to work out the best course of action for you. It doesn't, I have to say, guarantee you will always make money, but it may defend your money much better than previous processes would have done.
We must face the reality that there's no such thing as certainty, safety, security. You just got to minimise the risk. And
it's about managing the risk. People traditionally would say, well, if I don't want to take any risk, then put your money in the bank. And that's true. If you put your money in the bank and it's in a cash deposit, you are taking no risk of what might happen to the economy and the markets, etc., etc. The problem with leaving your money in the bank is the same as it's always been. Actually, the interest rate you get fails to keep up with the rate of inflation. So the reality is your money is going backwards in terms of what it'll buy, simply sitting it in the bank.
Have you found there's a particular time or an age where people start to want to talk to a financial advisor? I can imagine when somebody gets divorced, that could be one situation. But without that, is there a time when people start to talk to people like that?
You're right. I mean, things happen in people's lives which trigger them to say, I need to talk to a financial advisor, such as a divorce or that of nature. But if life goes on happily in the normal format, I would say it's in their mid-40s that they wake up to the fact that actually they are going to retire one day, and they do need to pay some attention to their financial situation to make sure that retirement is something they can enjoy. And as I often say, and they don't spend too much time just staring out the window because they can't afford to go out.
Well, of course, until you get to about 40, you think you're going to live forever anyway, so...
Well, there's two schools of thought. It's that people don't want to get old, and they say, I'll never get old, I'll die before I get there. And when they get to their 40s, they suddenly realise that actually that option's not terribly pleasant, and that it might want to have a retirement. And that's what, yes. So it's I would say mid-40s is when they become very aware that they need to pay attention. And it's often the time when the children are starting to be off their hands and things like that. And so there may be some money available in order to deal with the situation.
Yes. So I must admit, sometimes I look back and I think it should have been earlier rather than later.
There is no argument that time is the key to all of this.
Yeah.
It's about, if you start planning for your retirement in your 20s, it's a lot easier than it is to start planning when you're in your 40s.
Yeah.
It's very simple. I used to say, give me a 20-year-old and £100 a month and you'll have a very successful retirement situation. But when you get to 40, it's not £100 a month, it's £800 a month.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It becomes much harder.
Is it still a good time to invest?
A financial advisor will say today is always a good time to invest. And that might be seen in a slightly cynical way or not. But investing, if you look at what's happened during this pandemic, in the middle of March, markets dropped by anything up to 30% in 5 days. And of course, that was all over the press and everybody knew about it. What people are not so aware of is that 60% of that drop has been recovered. So the situation is already starting to correct itself, largely because it's obvious that the world banks, the US Treasury, the Bank of England and the European Central Bank are throwing lots of money at the economy in order to attempt to get it to survive. So lots of the recovery is coming because there is a real intent and a demonstration of that intent by world banks to stop the economy actually collapsing completely. So lots of investments and have recovered a lot of what they saw as an initial plummet, and let's not get away from that word. It was a plummet, but it's not about timing really. The principles of why you invest haven't really changed because we've got a pandemic. Investment is about time, and it comes back to the same thing. If you can invest a little over a long period, tends to give you the result, whereas trying to throw a lot of money over a short period of time is a risky operation. So it's about, we say in our industry, it's about time, not about timing. And there's lots of statistics that suggest if you weren't in the market at the 10 of the best days in the last 10 years, you probably missed something like 40% of the growth that has happened in the last 10 years. So it isn't about trying to judge when I should buy and when I should sell. It's simply about saying, I need time for this to do a job.
There might be a feeling of panic and fear. It's probably not a good time to panic, you say?
It is absolutely not a good time to panic. And the general advice to anybody who has investments is actually the best thing you can do is now sit on your hands and do nothing. And not panic. I mean, that's not true in every case, but as a general rule, and the general message I'm giving to my clients is that now is not the time to panic. In other words, if you surrender your investment now, you've really realized the losses that are there. And that the losses are still there, although it's recovered a lot. Losses are still there. And now is not the time to realize those losses. Let the market do what it's doing. Let your fund managers and let your experts that are working for you, that's what you're paying them for, let them do their job. And if you weren't planning to take the money out yesterday, then why would you take the money out yesterday is really the simple thing. That leave it alone and let it do its job, and it will.
I almost want to say, when is the time to panic? But that's not the case. One part of your role is to look into the future, and I guess everybody's looking into the future. One of the things that's fairly clear is perhaps 4 million people unemployed, number of senior and middle managers losing their jobs because of redundancy and because of the situation with companies, which poses the question that there will be people with redundancy money and maybe a pension that's accrued over a number of years, and there'll be a number of options as to what to do with the redundancy money and what to do with the pension, or indeed what to do with their life. What advice are you finding more and more people talking to you about that?
It's beginning to happen because that is the reality. I mean, the result of what we've seen over recent months in the pandemic is that certain industries are going to struggle in terms of survival. Let's be absolutely honest about it. And I don't think there's an exaggeration. Unemployment is going to rise. There's no question about that. And one can only guess at what level it might peak, as it were. But it will rise, in my opinion, quite significantly, simply because certain industries will not be able to survive without, getting rid of some of their employees in order to survive that very thing. That means there are going to be lots of people out there with redundancy packages which they won't know what to do. If we come back and remind ourselves of why a redundancy package is created in the first place, it's there in order to finance them through the situation of becoming unemployed, not earning money, to the point where they become employed again, and it's about financing them through that. So I would say to people with redundancy money, they need to be careful about suddenly spending all their money on one particular thing that they've been given, because they may find that it takes longer than they expect to get to the new position of employment or even self-employment. So you just need to be careful what you might do with that. And I certainly wouldn't be saying to somebody, you need to invest your redundancy package in order to make some money. That would, in my opinion, be the wrong thing to do initially. Wait until your life has re-established itself, and if there's anything left over, then you might consider doing something with it. It's an interesting question about, senior management, or it doesn't have to be senior management. Anybody who was employed by a fairly large company, Rolls-Royce and British Airways, and everybody is announcing that they're going to make lots of redundancies. Those companies have very good pension schemes of which those employees have been members of. There's going to be a question they may not realise they need to be asking is, what is the right thing for me to do with that pension now I'm no longer employed by this company? And the answer is a very individual answer. I can't give you a blanket answer. What I would say is that people need to recognise that that question is there, and they need to get good financial advice on terms of looking at their particular situation and advising them what's right for them. And the pub doesn't necessarily give you the right answer to that question. You do need to seek professional advice, and one you can trust.
Yeah. Because it's all very well, they may have had certain advice that has worked for them, but it's not the same situation. We're all individual.
Absolutely.
We've got presumably individual aspirations of how we see it. Because I know when I retired, we talked, and I valued that you asked me questions I never expected about how long I expected to live. I don't want to go just yet, by the way. And secondly, what sort of life did I want? And without those questions, you can't decide. We can't decide how long's the money going to last, or what it should look like. Or
I often say to people, before I can come up with a recommendation as to what to do with your money or your situation or whatever it is, and that is my function, to give you a recommendation that I think will give you the best chance of solving the problem that you have. But it's not about solving a problem. The initial discussion that we had, and I have with my clients, is we need to establish what is the goal, what is the target, what does life need to look like in order to be able to say we have succeeded, we've got to where we want to be. Once we understand what it is we're trying to get to and what life looks like, we can then do the mechanics of, well, how much money do we need in order for that to be able to happen? And then how do we create that amount of money in order to make that happen? So the absolute key to good financial advice is establishing what that goal or target is and working out. And that's sometimes the hardest thing for a client to do, is to say, well, I don't really know. I just want lots of money. Well, what do you want it to do for you is really the question.
I think a lot of us go through life not knowing what we want. So it is a difficult question.
Many of us go through life by default, by accident. Stuff happens by accident, by default, and we pick up baggage and stuff along the way. And when I say to people, right, I now need you to think about what life is going to look like down the road and what you want it to look like, that is often very alien to people, and they find it difficult. But it's absolutely essential to establish what it is we are trying to achieve before we look at the mechanics of how we might achieve it. I have 28 years of financial advice experience. That inevitably builds an experience in terms of people and business and the pitfalls and the things that have happened. There's 28 years of experience of my own and 28 years experience of what my clients have gone through. So it's often an advantage to have that initial conversation. It doesn't mean to say that you're necessarily going to do any business with me, but to be perfectly honest, I'm quite happy to have that initial conversation in order to guide somebody in the way that I might be able to give them some good guidance or at least tell them who to talk to.
Yeah.
And then later on, when they've established their new life, their new business, their new whatever, then they will remember me and they will come back and say, right, now that's established, now I can start dealing with the stuff that you really can help me with.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any other questions people should be asking? People are looking at this particular interview.
Nothing comes immediately to mind, and this is slightly divorced from perhaps that question, is that actually Key Financial advice has changed in the last 4 months, in the sense that I'm slightly more senior than lots of people in terms of career and age, and I never thought I would be engaged in things like Zoom and video conferencing and things like that. And what it's actually done is interviews for that matter. I never thought I'd be sitting here being interviewed, as it were. And what that's done is brought forward, not just for Key Financial, but for lots of companies, the video conferencing is becoming normal. It's not only becoming normal for businesses, it's becoming normal for people. Individual families, individual people are getting very used to that process. What that process now means is that, if somebody, I don't know, I had a conversation the other day with somebody who's being made redundant. He knows he's being made redundant from Rolls-Royce. And when it came down to, which Rolls-Royce factory you're being made redundant from, it was Derby. So what it demonstrates to me is that the world has changed, in that suddenly geography is becoming less relevant, because we can just simply talk to each other through this medium, which is becoming more normal for all of us.
Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, and without any cuts or anything, no bloopers, you're an absolute natural. I think you should be the financial advisor on BBC, or well, not so much BBC, but maybe anyway. But it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe that's because I'm just talking through 28 years of experience. Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, good.